welcome everybody to the Sustainable Cities Network Federal Infrastructure Work Group meeting for April. This is obviously a really important work group and opportunity to leverage a lot of the federal funding coming down. My name is Ann Richmond. I'm director of ASU Sustainable Cities Network and Project Cities program, and I want to introduce our support in the background and a very important participant with SCN, which is Allison Almond, who is our program coordinator. So many of you get emails from her on a consistent basis, and she's what makes everything keep running smoothly in the background. So she deserves a lot of credit. And of course, want to introduce Braden Kay, who's director of the City of Tempe's Sustainability Office. And he sits on our steering committee and also is currently chairing this particular work group, helping it get started. So Braden, thank you so much. And of course, we've got a very special speaker today, Steve Olmsted, who's with ADOT. Will allow him to introduce themselves, but I'll hand it over to, let's see, Braden, do you have any introductory remarks? Same with Allison, more kind of the housekeeping items in that.
As you know, we've been convening here monthly to talk about different federal grant opportunities. We do have a federal grants workshop that we're doing tomorrow, focused on 5 grants that are consultant from Refocus Partners, Shalini Vatala, who's on, and we might just allow her to say a brief intro and hello. And then what we'll do is, one of the projects that she identified was the Department of Transportation Protect program. And she told us, hey, did you know that some of the best work in resilient transportation is happening at ADOT? And that's how we knew to look Steve up. And Ann was like, yeah, Steve's been connecting with us for years now. So, but we hadn't made the connection between some of this ADOT work and what cities in the Sustainable Cities Network were doing. So we're so excited to get this catch up from Steve. And then there's also this opportunity to think about Protect as being one of these really interesting grant opportunities that provide an opportunity for us to access additional infrastructure money and for us to start to make some of these connections that'll really be important to the long-term generational climate work of both our region and our state. So with that, I'll hand it over just briefly for a brief hello and maybe a cheerleading session as to why to listen to this talk that you're about to hear from Stephen Olmsted. So yeah, take it from there.
Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Shalini Vatala from Refocus Partners, and our little team, we are all former public servants, so we know where federal funding is a huge opportunity, but also a massive challenge to try to mobilize. And we work with communities across the country to really make the most of these types of transformational moments for building resilience. And that's from the bottom up and the top down. And as Braden said, you all actually have some incredible leadership already embedded in the state. And so, Steve, I want to applaud ADOT. I had a chance to testify for the Senate Banking Committee and lift up some of your work on life cycle evaluation of heat and flood risks and the transportation networks. And I think there's an enormous amount that other states can learn from what you all are doing, but also huge value to being able to zoom out, to think regionally, and to put together bigger projects. Because in order to tap into this bigger money, you can't have huge numbers of piecemeal projects. You actually need to think about aggregation and scale, and to be able to use this money in a way that's more integrated and has long-term cross-sector benefits. So I'm super excited to listen to the team at ADOT's work, but also to be able to meet with many of you tomorrow to talk through the how we do this. How do you go from needs to ideas to fundable projects? So I'll stop there. Thanks, Braden, and over to you, Steve.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I know this is a huge topic, and I know we have some limited time. So what I attempted to do is just put together kind of some slides that I'm assuming will be shared, which you can kind of look at further. I'm just going to start out with the high dollar value. So that's kind of talking about the particular points, at least from the perspective of ADOT, and I just the agency really appreciates participating. Collectively over the years, we really couldn't get done, what we do get done without the help of an awful lot of internal and external partners, and including, funding opportunities for quite a while now. But to Shalini's point, really the one overarching comment that she made that was just, really right on was a lot of these things, and we kind of refer to them internally at ADOT as natural hazard. I don't think the agency as a whole, my interest was really the convergence of the built and natural environments. I think individually, when we do infrastructure, so heavy civil infrastructure development, in our case, surface, road surface development, you have individual efforts where you look at the natural environment, whether that's through the environmental NEPA process or, hydrology or vegetative management or any number of kind of entry points. But I don't think collectively we looked around the whole state, and I'm not just talking about just climate change, but just weather events in general, and how much of an impact, for the most part, I'll be honest, cost-wise. But as this has evolved, we are in 2023, so we are talking about, kind of equity and social and economic and geographic and a lot of other inputs to that equation now. And I think it took a while for us to get the agency seeing the value in how much of an impact on the life cycle of infrastructure development natural hazard was. And then the only other piece I'll add is that within kind of that overarching natural hazard title, we do break it down into, where we just have traditional environmental considerations, right? And then we kind of compartmentalize the extreme, where we have dust and flood and things like that. And then we're fortunate, have been very fortunate, a lot of credit to leadership over the last decade, to be able to work in the climate space, not just from kind of a United Nations climate model aspect, but then what does that even mean when you kind of extract climate data and attempt to blend that with infrastructure development. So, a lot of credit goes to other people that have allowed us the space to work on that. So I'll start the presentation and make sure that I move along quickly so that it opens it up for some conversation. And I love this slide. It doesn't have anything specifically key to the protect effort, but I will say, one, it shows the enormity of infrastructure development. What you're looking at is I-10 down by Picacho. Those of you that have driven between Arizona and Tucson run by this area. And unfortunately for those that are Arizona historians, the town of Picacho is actually underneath the roads, the white concrete roads to the left of the middle of the screen. So ADOT basically purchased the entire town of Picacho. And the reason was we had extensive traffic and really safety issues through this area. And we knew it was also developing in the 20-25 year period forward. I will add an additional thought. This is a key area. It's not one of our highest priority dust storm areas, but it is a dust storm location. And it also happens to be, as part of this project, we were awarded a $14 million grant by Federal Highways to develop particle tracking for dust storms that are digitally connected to the roadway signage that reduces the roadway speed down to stoppage commensurate with particulate matter activity in the roadway. So it's a pretty novel project that we were able to do here. So of course that's not, there we go. So again, protect. And again, some of us may have more or less knowledge on the inner workings of what constitutes, an 8,000 or 9,000 page bill that's turned into law. I read a lot of that stuff agonizingly, but it's really informative. I would encourage you, those of you that have kind of a government relations type element, one of the key starting points to understanding what you might be able to get involved in and how those connection points may work into your respective areas would be just to do some hardcore reading. We also have, which we're not going to cover here, but we have the Inflation Reduction Act is another element that has a number of opportunities in there as well. But we're going to stick with what I think most people know as the IIJA. That's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's very confusingly is also referred to as the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So they're synonymous. That don't confuse one with the other. They just, as they moved along into development into a bill and then into law, kind of evolved in their terms. I highlighted the one. I know this is a wide reaching working group. You're not just considering surface transportation. Braden's comments in particular mentioned the interconnectedness of different infrastructures, whether we're talking energy, water, wastewater, road. It's massive. It's expensive for local public agencies and others to develop. And how do you access funds to do that? So I just picked out kind of a highlight there that in general, we're loosely talking the $1 trillion plus IIJA effort. And from a transportation standpoint, you kind of break the bill down into about half, which was familiar to the general workings of the federal government. In other words, they were reauthorizing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of programs that already existed. The generational investment was the additional, 500 million plus, 500 billion plus that added new. And that was the generational part. So obviously many of you are at least aware of the talking points. We're talking transit, interstate construction. There you see drinking, water, wastewater, energy, all the things that I just mentioned. So I think, I'm kind of the surface transportation person, but we spend a lot of time talking with railroads and a lot of the other modes and how those connect outwards. We have some working efforts with non-surface transportation groups as well. And then the bottom part I'll just highlight, and this is important to understand, is in this instance, most funding, reauthorization funding, is in its most historic familiarization comes in the form of formula. So depending on what state you're in, depending on what group that funding's being broken down into, there are longstanding formulas to engage and break out that funding. So, in this instance, Protect is a little novel. It has both a formula and a discretionary element. So we'll talk about that on the next couple slides. But before I leave this one, I just wanted to highlight the reality that I think for those of you that may not be familiar with those terms, formula again is generally the continuing reauthorization of longstanding funding buckets. We generally refer to them as. The discretionary is probably people are a little more familiar with the general approach to accessing those funds is in the form of a grant proposal. Is generally how that works out. But I wanted to list some of the kind of sustainable and resilience aspects. You see carbon reduction and EV charging and rural projects, wildlife crossing. So there's a whole host of those kind of natural built environment connection points that are applicable more or less depending on where you sit, whether you're urban or tribal or rural and the such. So I thought this was a pretty valuable slide. Again, you'll have access to these slides, but I tried to gather up, again, a very arcane federal funding term is apportioned. I think if you really want to look good at a political meeting, you might want to learn the term apportioned. It throws people, they're not really always sure what that means, but in generally, that's just how it's allocated, right? And I wanted to put some things up there that were highly identified as opportune. Now, we have a big interest in the bridge program formula and where resilience connects to our bridge program. Not every municipality has a bridge issue, but many municipalities have probably at least a singular bridge that is older and impactfully quite expensive. And how do you look at that, and how do you engage maybe some resilience funding based on some of your largest infrastructures that you may not visit but every 25, 50, or 100 years? But that just kind of gives you that sampling of just that additional 500 billion plus in new ones. And then we just kind of, it's just kind of a crosswalk for participation. Again, it's not all encompassing, but it really lays out where the different individuals can kind of participate there. So let me just, get down a little bit more into the specifics. I put at the top of the slide some things that we at ADOT have of particular note and have working groups on for climate and resilience. And one thing I wanted to point out, and I know some of the folks on the group are probably very well read and have a pretty comprehensive understanding, or at least a superficial understanding of resilience and how some of these things go. But one of the things to keep in mind is, where you're really talking, adaptation, where you're really trying to maybe adapt things, infrastructures, or the needs of your population, or whatever it is, your system as a whole, and how do you adapt to it? And then the other side of that coin is the mitigation side. And I think sometimes that gets a little confusing, even if you just kind of follow along in the press. You'll see a lot of competing threads or concurrent threads, maybe not competing all the time. But are you, is your focus a little bit more on adaptation, where you're initially addressing current or horizontal, or, near term or horizontal, or far in the future concerns over whether we're talking heat or precipitation, or heat for protection of citizens and things of that nature? And that's where you'll see a lot of the carbon reduction, greenhouse gas emission calculation side of the discussions. Different EPA rules on carbon and electric transmission management and things like that. So I think it was important to understand that at least at ADOT we look at both. We have a longer maturity curve on the extreme weather climate adaptation side for our infrastructure, but most assuredly we are looking at kind of the mitigation side as well. And I will admit that the IIJA requirements by design have pressed DOTs to begin considering a lot of that, the greenhouse gas emissions and carbon reduction side of things. So again, I laid out at the bottom there the novelty of the protect being both formula and discretionary, and that's why I put the word grant in there. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I won't go over the details on the slide, but the protect formula is something that ADOT will be administering. The immediate engagement, not just through these working groups where you can gain further understanding and participation on the topic just from an educational and connection standpoint. But I think it's also key to know that the most immediate touch point is working with your planning entities. So wherever you are on the continuum and whatever type of planning group you have within your operation, and then that engagement to the regional transportation planning entities is generally how the traditional planning to programming would go. No different than any of the other. I think we just published the draft for our next $7 billion, which is just astounding to me. $7 billion 5-year construction program is now out. And that traditional planning to programming, sorry, P2P process is not going to be any different on these things. I will note the protect discretionary is where you can see there, if it's readable, on the right side, third box down, it says eligible entities. And that's where you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck. And again, it's not as big as the $7.3 billion bucket for the formula side, but it is $1.4 billion contract authority. And that's where states and municipalities, local governments, tribes, no matter where you are there, who you want to partner with, can engage directly in applications. The last thing I'll kind of say on kind of the grant discretionary side is what is, back to the point about interconnectedness for infrastructures, and then let's just say interconnectedness between a large entity like ADOT and a local public agency or a tribe. The beauty here is that where there are some limitations and application, geographic or right-of-way applications for the formula protect, the beauty of the protect discretionary is it is inclusive of a lot of different groups that can participate. The beauty of that is you can work with ADOT to identify needs that ADOT may be already undertaking. I can think of several overwhelming storm incidents that occurred up in the Flagstaff area, where we have a magnitude of county and county flood control and local municipality issues that need to be corrected that we would not necessarily have control over, right? Because it's outside of the ADOT right of way. So I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole there, but the beauty here is where you can really start to connect some of these pieces to work together and you know, identify where ADOT may be doing some work and also participate in that. Just real quickly, the slide deck's relatively long, but I always like to bring some pictures to give everybody a scope. When I'm fortunate to go around the country and present, they're often, you know, like, well, we visit Arizona. We often stay at the so-and-so resort, and it's just beautiful. You guys got great roads, and they really can't overwhelmingly imagine that we're inundated with weather. And admittedly, we don't have a nor'easter, you know, where my cousins are from. We don't have hurricanes and the such that many of us, you know, read about, or maybe many of you even have experienced or have relatives that have experienced these, or the tornadoes that we just saw. But I often equate some of the southwestern states as kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. And I'll explain that as I go a little longer. I just wanted to give everybody one slide on what in the world is resilience. We never really use that word. I will admit, several people probably have different opinions. It was a very convenient, and I will say, I enjoy the word, default word in which to avoid, somewhat, depending on where you were in the country, the politically sensitive, you know, term of climate change. And where maybe extreme weather considerations were not really as mature inside your operations. So resilience under any circumstances was a great opportunity to kind of leverage just the other concerns that operations have besides the normal risks that they face. So I wanted to give just an example of where what we overarchingly kind of consider critical transportation infrastructure protection. That's in alignment with the Transportation Research Board's work on CTIP. And then I just kind of gave you a breakdown from there on how we at ADOT kind of view these things. And then I always get concerned if I put, you know, myself and my area of interest at the top. So I tend to slide it down at the bottom. So you'll see kind of although I'm involved across the board with CTIP, you'll see what we're talking about here for weather and natural hazard down at the bottom. I'll move a little more quickly now that we've kind of left the details of the protect. You can Google anything you want, ADOT sustainability, ADOT resilience. I'm not saying these are married in any particular order. Keeping our website updated. I must admit I'm behind, so we don't always have the latest and greatest, but there is a ton of information on there that we've done over the last 4 or 5 years. When we talk about protect, we talk about sustainability, we talk about resilience, formula, discretionary, you know, whether we're talking water, wastewater, or surface transportation, no matter what it is, it became very apparent to me that we needed to go even farther. So we're fortunate that we matured a little bit. We look at it from a total systems thinking, so that we kind of look at our infrastructure in total. And that's kind of self-explanatory. I won't read it, but we have a pretty overarching, and I will admit, fortunately, somewhat of an advanced view on incorporating sustainability and resilience and equity and traditional environmental compliance and a lot of these different things into kind of a total systems thinking. We are underway in mapping a lot of our activities to the UN SDGs. For those of you that are somewhat unaware of them, they exist. They've been around for quite a while. The latest iteration you'll see there in the middle of the screen is not only are there the 17 goals, but there's 169 targets that identify those. And I've popped up one there on the right in white, target 9.1 under the climate adaptation. And it's pretty self-explanatory: develop quality, reliable, sustainable, resilient infrastructure for regional and transborder infrastructure, right? To support XXX. So I just wanted to share that total systems thinking is also where ADOT, from, whether we're talking resilience, protect funding, when we look at how do we screen those, how do we prioritize protect funding, I thought it would be fair to communicate to this group that one of the ways we do screening, one of the responsibilities that I have in identifying, what gets done, what gets prioritized, how do we consider what, is that total systems thinking. And it is from a, whether it's rural, urban, whether it's tribal, whether it's equity-based, whether it's environmental justice-based, that it's fairly wide-reaching, and it's going to take us a while, but just know that we go through that screening process, and who gets what gets done is very important to us, and making sure it's a very balanced approach. Again, don't want to spend a lot of time on these things. I just wanted to supply everybody with a good data set from the slide deck. Everything we do is focused from an asset management standpoint, predominantly by requirement for state DOTs to inventory the health of their system. So it was a very natural place in which to leverage natural hazard was through overall system asset management. Impossible to read the slide, but I wanted you to know that we have developed an end-to-end engineering process from adaptation through planning, through qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, down through design engineering and construction to kind of incorporate weather and climate change. I wanted to talk a little bit briefly on the mitigation side, right? We talk about greenhouse gas emissions, carbon reduction. Okay, so these are just terms. I don't think anybody's going to get hurt by being aware that there is a labyrinth of carbon reduction and greenhouse gas emissions calculations and inventorying underway in surface transportation as well. And a lot of this is triggered through, right, the IIJA. And it's not specific to protect. In this instance, these are a little bit more kind of climate challenge, carbon reduction based. But I did want to make everybody aware that there's an entire thread on the mitigation side of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon reduction underway at ADOT. In this particular effort, we're doing quite a bit of advanced research work on our pavement assets. Another thing that's underway, I think some of the local municipalities and more progressive states around the country are far ahead of where Arizona is, but we are motivated to participate in green public procurement. Again, not necessarily indicative directly to protect, but again, overarching under IIJA of a lot of new efforts underway that all end up being intertwined. And I think it's in the best interest from an educational standpoint for a lot of people just to be aware of where these things trigger and participate. Again, just mentioning that we work with the UN climate data. We're kind of on our third iteration of pulling climate data. That's a big help when it comes to protect in considering the long-term, the far horizontal out to the year 2100, and how we look at, in particular, heat and precipitation relative to infrastructure development. And it's pretty intensive for those of you that are somewhat familiar with UN climate data. In this instance, I'll give you an example of our most recent effort is almost 6 terabytes of data. So there's a lot of high computing analysis and science and engineering knowledge. I think that those on the phone would be motivated to get clarity on where are your operations at and being able to work through complex engineering and science data. Again, we have a program definition for resilience. You can see it on the internet. You'll have it in the slide deck. And then just looking at a kind of a risk effort overall on the key areas that we look at ADOT. This is just a small sample, but it's our main larger categories. Again, we oversee 30,000 maintenance lane miles, 5,000 bridges, port of entries, border with Mexico, and our infrastructure operates from sea level to about 8,000 feet. So there's a lot to consider there. And I'm just going to run through just that collective, that kind of that death by 1,000 cuts. We don't necessarily have the multi-billion-dollar hurricanes, but we have dozens and dozens of $1, $5, $10, $20 million impacts a year to our system. So that's wildfire. You'll see here, this is slope degradation, where the slope is degrading underneath the roadway. This is I-17. This is a kind of a interconnectedness overrun from the county road out onto I-17 as you head toward Anthem. This is US 89. This was a geomorphologic deterioration in the roadway that created a landslide. This one is one of my favorites. I will spend 15 seconds talking about this one. We spent about $500,000 on the structure to the left. It was a drainage structure, and it flooded again and kind of caused erosion around the structure. So we spent an additional $1.5 million enhancing that structure that you can see now with wing walls and fortified concrete. And by the time we had the fourth flood, the water decided not even to use the structure. And what you're looking at is the water eroded and went completely around the structure. So it's immense, the undertaking. These boulders, you can see the size of the tractor actually rolled from an adjacent mountain area about 2 miles and ended up in our roadway. Those of you that like skiing or snowboarding, you know, we have snow, dust storms, we have flooding, we have a lot of soft soils, especially in the northern climates, where we have to dig out quite a bit of earth to get out of the subsidence zone. Flooding. And then this is just a great picture of one of our incredibly hardworking crews in the middle of the night. They're actually inside a concrete box culvert trying to clear out a drainage structure to make sure that the roadway gets drained by the morning. So it's intensive. I don't want to underestimate the maintenance and operations side of resilience as well, and a little more flooding. So I'm going to give 2 quick real examples because I want to get to the last of the slide. 2 examples, and again, these aren't Protect because Protect funding is very new. But I wanted to give 2 examples of some efforts from kind of a program standpoint of things we were able to get done with just dedicated highway funds, which was a tough go to get justified in the beginning. But we took a look at all our Maricopa County area pumps relative to most of the state routes and I-10 that you drive every day or avoid. And developing, there's the pump system in itself. So we developed a web-based tool to incorporate real-time data that was being fed from those pumps in real time and overlay them not just with historical precipitation data, but we were able to kind of look at, you know, what small zonal areas were going to look like relative to climate change. And again, I don't want to overwhelm anybody that's completely afraid of math. Those of you that love math will know who you are, that we really are, this is the tough part. So how do you project the future, right? And that's just an ongoing conversation on evolution of math, science, GIS, climate data engineering, and the such. But I did want to pass along that at ADOT, we do a lot of probability work to just begin to frame the conversation of risk. Okay, so I'll leave it at that, but I just wanted to put forward that using statistical modeling to kind of inform leadership, maybe in your case, it's a mayor council, and to be able to kind of do deep analysis, but then, right, as we always know, you kind of move them down into easy talking points as well. We were fortunate to, this last example I'll give you was highlighted in a report to Congress recently, and it was really looking at kind of what we've been talking about. How do you consider some of these natural hazards aspect into project development? So this bridge is, in fact, we're under construction as we speak now. This is the old bridge. This is south of Tucson on State Route 80. And it had reached end of life. Even though that looks very high in the air, it is over the San Pedro River. And we realized through modeling that this bridge is a very important rural state route, was susceptible to overtopping at the 50-year event. So for you, those of you that may not be as adept at hydrology and hydraulics, the 50-year storm is rare, but it is generally what we design a lot of our infrastructure for. And the idea that a reasonably probable 50-year event happening, right, in 50 years, and then render this location incapacitated was not really acceptable. So those are kind of some of the things we looked at: hydrology, hydraulic scour. I won't mire down for those that are a little less interested in that, but it just gives you the wide sweeping idea of how we kind of synthesize. And if we're talking about protect funds, some of the things, this is a water instance, some of you may be looking at other types of instances, whether it's heat or snow or whatever it might be, but just the different components that go into some of that probability analysis. And in the end, what we decided to do was reduce the number of bridge spans in the water itself. I'll go back one. The bridge spans are those pillars that are in the water there, and actually reduce the number that were in the wash to further protect the bridge from collapsing. We went deeper on the vertical supports, which are the kind of the black lines that go straight down to the bottom of the slide. We went about 15% deeper on the drilled shafts. We decided to leave the bridge abutments in place and also add new to kind of, let's just make it easy, double the width of the side supports. And then we actually decided to raise the bridge a foot. This is the last slide I want to get to because I know there may be some questions. I felt it might be really helpful. This is in no way comprehensive. I must admit, I was sitting waiting for my daughter to finish something and managed to just text out a list of things that I might use. And it was just, again, it's not comprehensive, but I thought if I was external to ADOT and I was not just really enthusiastic about participating, what would I need to kind of pause? And what's the list of things that, me, Steve, really had to kind of consider over the last decade as we developed these things? I mentioned earlier on the science and engineering side of things and making sure that there was some comprehensive capacity within your operations to even look at the complexity of doing resilience building. But I did want to list some other things. Again, they're in no particular order. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. But again, near-term ambition, right? Enthusiasm versus procrastination. And often that procrastination can be, right? Should we adapt? Should we mitigate? Should it be a mix? Should we wait and see? Again, I've just been talking about the natural hazard focus. Many of us are on different continuums of the climate topic, right? Whether you're, more from a conservative region in the state or progressive or whatever. Where's that orderly and disorderly, kind of policy and discussion development on climate? And that's the horizontal piece. I don't think there's a problem with us needing to adapt to extremes, but I think ultimately the long-term view of these things can mire down with different views. Workforce capacity, I mentioned that. Political consensus, right? How do you present some of these things to your mayor and council to gain resolutions to say, let's advance this type of thinking? Project priority, what should it include? Should it include equity? Is it EJ? Does it affect EJ populations? What do you use for your screening mechanisms? Okay. I already mentioned there won't be labor design engineering, right? You're often having to consider things that are outside traditional engineering design standards, no matter whether you're talking roads or water, wastewater, or EV charging stations or whatever. I like this one: general frictions and challenges of implementation. That can be as tough as trying to get through your college class, right? What's the friction or lack of friction you have with your professor? And that's can't be underestimated. How do you smooth out those touch points to make sure you're just making small incremental improvements? Again, how do you justify capital use? Funding constraints are always really limited. How do you gain use of some of the traditional funding and marry it to some of these things like protect? And just to throw that out there, remember, from a local public agency standpoint, obviously there's a very mature process for the municipal bond market. There's a growing interest in use of resilience bonds, and those are alternate, opportunities instead of or in addition to protect. And then just the bottom line, you know, I don't think it's anything that's out extraordinary, but we know it's just, you watch the news and any number of things have become, you know, it's a discussion of politics, economics, and equity. So probably went a little over, but appreciate the time.